Hello and welcome back to Endeavors AI podcast. I am your host, Collin McKee, and today we are joined by Sarah Romanko of Geek Ventures. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, it's great to be here.
Awesome. The Geek Ventures sits at the intersection of immigrant founders, global markets, and AI. And this conversation is about how those pieces actually kind of fit together. So if you do us the favor and kind of explain why immigrant founders and why you believe there's really an underappreciated or open market there for venture capital.
Of course. So I'm Sarah. I'm on the investment team here at Geek Ventures. I focus on sourcing, evaluating, and diligencing potential investment opportunities. And the reason why we invest in immigrant founders. So a little bit about our story. Our founder and managing partner, he was an immigrant to the US from Belarus. He was an angel investor in 6 unicorns at the pre-seed and seed stages. Ultimately, that was 10% of his portfolio that became unicorns. And then he also worked at Google, Meta, and a Series A AI infrastructure startup, ultimately building a really strong track record to start Geek Ventures in 2021. Not only were many of our founder managing partners investments that became unicorns were founded by immigrants, but also there's a lot of data to show that immigrant founders are positioned to work really hard, are able to build great companies, and that's something that we're doubling down here at Geek Ventures.
Cool. Excellent. It's a great strategy. Other than that piece of immigrant founders, what else does Geek do differently than say a traditional early stage fund?
Yeah, of course. So, specifically for us, Geek Ventures, we help our founders become experts at fundraising in the US. So, we know that many of our founders that we're investing in, when they immigrate to the US, they don't have a strong network here. And our job is to help them become experts. And so, what does that actually mean? So, there's a lot of different ways that we add value. So, in addition to fundraising, we have a really strong community. So, really strong community of founders, investors, and LPs. And so, like all of our company founders join our CEO community, where our founders are quite active in asking for help, sharing resources, making introductions. We also have like in-person events where we bring in VCs that are actively investing in founders that are like raising. Our LPs are a great resource as well for our founders. So we have a lot of like partner resources that we provide for our founders. We also have a recruiting agency that we work with, and then we have a really great like post investment support that we provide. So as I mentioned earlier, I am on the investment team. My main responsibility is to source startups, but I also do post investment support, meaning that after we invest, I have the opportunity to work closely with our founders. What does that mean specifically? So reading through every single update that our over 50 plus portfolio companies share with us, doing check-in calls with our founders, making introductions, also featuring our founders in our investor newsletter that's shared with investors in our network, and ultimately just figuring out how we can help. We like to meet founders where they are. Some founders want more help, some want less help, but ultimately it's what do they need the most, and we are able to meet them there. And then I guess just the last thing, like I think one of my favorite things is that we're nerds at heart. So, we love geeking out with our founders about whatever they're building. And we also, we bring that same curiosity and passion to every conversation. And at the same time, we recognize the importance of empathy because oftentimes, understanding like those challenges, celebrating the wins, and really supporting founders throughout the ups and downs of their journey. We know that it's very difficult for founders, and oftentimes they don't really have anybody else to talk to. So sometimes we just want to be that listening ear for founders when they're just like, hey, can I just talk to you about this? And so we really want to be that person who they feel like they can talk to whenever they need something.
Yep. Human connection is still of great importance. That kind of leads into the next question I was going to ask, because you emphasized that, the relationships are still very, very deep in how you guys operate. And so why do you think that's even more important nowadays? The topic here being AI. As AI gets better and better, you almost think like you're talking to a real person when it is AI. Why do you think the human connection is still of high import?
Yeah, of course. I've thought a lot about this, and I think this is especially important in an industry like venture capital where relationship building is so important. So thinking back to, to the early history of venture capital, typically when venture capital investments were made, it was based on who you knew. And typically only founders that knew certain people could get investments, which is, ultimately what we're trying to change now is there's a lot more accessibility, not only to working in venture, but also to getting funding. And AI is a way to kind of help streamline the process in the sense of it's a lot easier to reach out to more investors. It's easier to find these investors and it's easier to craft target messages. But what AI has not been able to do yet is building those relationships that take time to develop. And that's something that I tell founders and aspiring VCs because, in VC, in order to get really great deals and also in order to close those deals, you have to have good relationships with the founders. And so I think that AI can help streamline the process, but being able to build these great relationships, and that's something I'm really proud of, is really what helps you move forward in venture. Because when I think back to when I first started working in venture, like, or well, before I even had a job, was I had to build my own network because I didn't know anybody. It's really competitive to even just get a role in this industry, and so I think that AI is not at that point where it can really replace that empathy that's needed. And that goes back to our value add because a good VC has really good empathy. And maybe someday founders will be talking to an AI VC. Maybe that's going to happen in the future. But I think right now, it's also just a feeling that you have a human on the other side of you because even if AI had the empathy, I think people would still want a human because it's also the psychological aspect of I just want to feel like I'm talking to someone who just gets it. So even if AI could be more empathetic, I still think people would choose humans, which is a definitely a controversial viewpoint.
Right. Right. So in the process, like the diligence that you guys do, I'm sure you're using some kind of tools. Everyone is,
Yes.
if you're not using something to help you with the calculations as opposed to, calculator and abacus spreadsheets, you're falling far behind. So are there some examples of what AI is doing positively in your firm as far as diligence or, wherever you'd want to highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, not only do we invest in AI companies, but we also do use AI in our diligence processes. And the way that we like to think about this is AI is not replacing the evaluation that we do as a VC. It's helping augment it, similar to how accountants use Excel to make it easier to put together spreadsheets. So a really good example is one of our portfolio companies called Wokello. So they're an AI powered tool for creating due diligence reports and memos based on public and private data for like M&A, private equity, corporate and VC use cases. What's really helpful for us is when we're doing market research. So what you do is we'll basically say, okay, I'm analyzing this specific industry. Here are some competitors. Can you do full market research beyond my competitors that I already know of? Can you tell me the market sizing? What are some trends? You basically just put in, like, you can even ask research questions. And this is helpful to us because as VC, we see so many deals. And when we're in late stage diligence with a number of companies, we want to be able to spend more time getting to know the founder and getting to take more time on that human element. And so AI tools like Wokello have been able to help streamline this. And I think it's really important though to highlight that, because a lot of founders will say like, oh, like we're concerned if a VC is not even using that human approach at all. Like, how do we know there's not going to be any bias? Like, and that's definitely a huge concern too, as someone like me who's really passionate about working with underrepresented founders. And the good news here is that we still have that human element of evaluation. This is more once we get to the later stage. So bias in that sense isn't as much of an issue. What I will say is there actually are some firms that are using AI fully to evaluate, which I think is really fascinating, where it's just like an AI VC firm. So people or founders will submit their companies online through like a pitch form, and the VC actually has their own proprietary tool that says, here's the specific criteria, and it makes decisions just based on that with very little human in loop. So I think, and of course, that's not something that's being sold widely because if a company, a VC develops their own great criteria, why would they sell it, right? Like they would want to use it internally. So, and then we've also tried out tools to just help from third parties to evaluate deal flow. And I think the challenge has just been in trying to figure out like, everyone has a specific criteria. So how do you find those really strong companies that stand out and avoiding that bias, right? So I think that's just kind of some specific examples, but we also use AI, of course, in our day.
Yeah, it's excellent. Like, almost surprised that you guys didn't decide to keep that in-house, yeah, not share it with others. Because to your point, I've had some discussions with companies that are doing something pretty much spot on to what you described. Some success, some wins, some losses. People are kind of going through the process of working the kinks out. Are there any processes that you guys have decided intentionally, we're not going to automate this? You kind of mentioned the human element. We want to make sure that that's strong. Is there anywhere that you guys as Geek Ventures have said, okay, this we've looked at automating, we're not going to do it. We want to keep this more on a human level.
Definitely. So I think a really important aspect of this is calls with founders. So one thing that I am, I'm seeing a lot of like AI, I'm trying to figure out the right term for this, but it's like AIs that will join like calls and will basically be like an AI teammate. So it'll basically be able to talk to you, take notes, and converse with you. It's still kind of in the early stages of development, but I can anticipate, over time, VCs starting to say, okay, we're going to have, these AI teammates interviewing founder and doing like our first pass, similar to how interviewers will have basically just like founder or basically have candidates applying online and doing like a recorded interview. I mean, it's still not advanced yet to be like fully talking to an AI, but it's still that online aspect. And so I think that's something that, thinking like a VC firm hypothetically could automate. And I've even thought, oh, like, would this make the process faster? But the thing for me that's so important is understanding the personality of the founder and having the chance to actually talk to them one on one. And so I think that's something that is would be very, very difficult to automate just from the side of when I'm pitching a company to my team, during our investment meetings, I want to be able to have my own conviction of why I'm excited about a founder. And AI will maybe make it easier to have more founder calls, but I don't think that it would make it almost more difficult to pitch a company because I didn't have that firsthand experience. So I'd say that's one thing that's definitely I see it taking a very long time before VCs start doing that. And also I think there'd be pushback too from the founders because like I remember when I was working for several startups, like and I was managing the fundraising process, I could imagine the founder would not want to just talk to an AI. They want to talk to a real person.
Yep. And so kind of to piggyback on that, you mentioned that one of the things you do for your founders is to help them become fluent in fundraising in the US. So and that's, I couldn't fathom an AI agent right now that could do that, hand holding and walking through. So what sort of things are you teaching them or what are they relearning? How does that differ from where they're coming? Like what's that kind of look like as far as teaching the immigrant founders about fundraising here in the States?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I love that. So I think specifically for us, so let's say our founder has, we came across a company that's really exciting. They just moved to the US and they just, and they're in the process of raising their round. We've invested an initial check and we're wanting to help them close the round. So what this means specifically is we'll set up check-in meetings with the founder and figure out what specifically they need help with. So for example, let's say that, they need help in figuring out how to find the best fit of investors and how to build relationships with them. So what we'll do is we'll work with them and we'll say, okay, like what are you already skilled at? What are the specific skills you have in fundraising? What do you need experience with? And we'll be able to do one-on-one calls with these founders because the way we see it is like I mentioned earlier, every founder has a different need or a different ask from us, and some are more experienced, some are less. And so we want to make sure that that's tailored. And so, like one founder I'm working with right now, who I'm working really closely with, been working a lot with them on their fundraising. And so I've been understanding like what's going well specifically, like when they're reaching out to investors, and what has been the feedback if they're passing or they're moving forward. How can we understand? How can we take that feedback and improve on that? So, like for example, is the issue more of getting to that first meeting, or is the issue more of just getting past the first meeting and closing the round? And so figuring out what specific feedback the founder needs. And then also on top of that, like making curated introductions to the to specific investors, and then also kind of explaining why we think those VCs are a good fit and making it a very collaborative process. So I think one thing that's been really exciting is when I've been able to make several intros that have actually resulted in an investment. And so what that meant was making sure there's a double opt-in. So making sure the founder was interested and that VC was interested. And then kind of explaining to both the founder and the VC of why I thought there was a fit. And then just kind of helping connect those two the two different sides and then making sure that there's that mutual fit. And so kind of along the way telling our founders like, okay, here's why this worked, and just kind of teaching them based on my own experience from past roles of helping with fundraising. And then also too, just from the VC's perspective of, hey, like I know what is important to VCs, and so here's how you can kind of leverage that. So that's like how we help. And I've had the opportunity to work with several of our founders on just kind of closing their funding rounds. And I think a really great example, this was prior to me joining, but one great success story that we had early on in our fund was that, Geek Ventures had made a 100K investment. And then through several introductions, one of our portfolio companies ended up getting $1 million in funding raised just through introductions. And so that's something where, we're really proud of our network in terms of helping with follow on funding. And that's something that, we doubled down on because our founder managing partner, like he built that network. Each of us have our own specific investor networks. And so we're really happy to kind of leverage that all together to have one kind of cohesive, curated investor list for each of our founders that needs it.
Excellent. Excellent. That's great. Are you finding anywhere where your founders may have underestimated what it takes post raise? You're helping them slide through or kind of grease the skids or the skis as far as getting to the money. And of course, they make their pitch. But when it's time for the rubber to hit the road, have you noticed anywhere where they may have just kind of underestimated what it's going to take to scale?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've actually been thinking a lot about this because one of the biggest challenges I've been seeing right now is the challenge with hiring. And I think this is a really important topic because when you see, companies like Meta and you see companies like OpenAI, and they're hiring these really talented founding engineers for millions of dollars, it really makes you think like, what does it take for a company to not only, I'd say, find great candidates, but also hire them and then retain them given how competitive the market is. Because when you think about like how companies are hiring, it's almost like drafting for major sports leagues. It's like they're offering all these benefits. Who gets the first pick? They're shifting different companies or different teams, I would say. And so one thing that's been, and this is why it's great because we do have a recruiting agency that we work with and that they help with hiring. But I think for our founders, it's to really understand like what are the unique things that, and not just for our founders but other companies that are in the process of raising, is what's unique about the company and how are they going to manage that hiring process. Right now there's so many companies that are hiring, and I think about like one of our companies when they're thinking about hiring, and they're like, okay, like we need a employee in a specific location with a specific skill set. That can be really challenging to find if you have a really specific perfect fit, but there's only a certain number of those people or ones that are willing to go to a certain location, certain benefits, etc. And so I think like this is why I always love to ask founders this question of saying, how are you thinking about hiring? Like what are your resources? Because it's one thing to say, okay, like I've grown the sales, like I have a great, co-founder, maybe a few team members, but how do you scale the company long term? And so understanding like what is the founder's past experience in hiring. And so if they've hired before, then they understand what it takes. And so I think this is just something where we'll also work with them and share kind of from our, from like the team's experience and just like our fellow founders who can help them. So that's something that like I think is not talked about enough, is how difficult it actually is to hire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point, and especially now with all the layoffs, the whole both sides of it is just a very interesting world that we're living through, and it's great that you guys offer that resource as far as, the recruiting process and kinda walking them through that because, yeah, if you can't get the right people on board, you're gonna be stuck. You're gonna meet your ceiling pretty quick.
Yes.
So, okay. Well, kind of to summarize things, what do you see or what gets you excited? What do you geek out about AI forthcoming, say, in the next year or two in the venture capital space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this kind of relates to our thesis. So, like, as a kind of a quick recap for us, like, we're focusing on, like immigrant founders at the intersection of kind of like AI and robotics. So, specifically on the AI side, we're pretty open to different types of companies as long as they have like technical differentiation. And on the robotics side, it could be, more broadly like software for robotics or more like robotics itself. And I apologize, but we have maintenance coming. So, I will
Okay.
be right back.
All right.
So, as I was saying, we do basically invest at the intersection of AI and robotics. And we are, really excited right now about companies that are doing something that's technically differentiated. And I think what's really interesting right now in terms of a space that I've been looking a lot at is, specifically like software for robotics. So we actually were looking at a company where they were like, okay, how can we develop specific models for people who basically like don't know how to code, but we're able to teach them how to program robots. And we think that's really differentiated because that's not something that we've seen a lot of over the past. I guess we've seeing more of it now than we did, like, let's say 10 years ago. And so I think that's something that like I get super excited about. Also, on the AI side, I would say agents to agents. So let's say like people, like you have two agents and they're selling to each other. I think that could be really interesting in negotiation. Something where I'm like, okay, if I see companies in this space, I get really excited. And then if there's maybe something combining those, like what if you have agents and robotics that are selling to each other? I think that could be really interesting. Maybe you're like selling software and you're negotiating. So I think like thinking about the combination of those sectors, it can be certainly very interesting for us. And that's we've seen a few companies in the space. So I'm speaking more in generalizations here, but definitely looking forward to meeting more companies in those areas.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's an exciting concept for sure. So before anyone would approach Geek Ventures, because I'm sure there's duds and there's winners out there, what would you tell the founders to make sure that they've got right before they reach out to a company like Geek Ventures like yourselves?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And before I answer it, I'll share one thing. Advice to all the founders that are watching, making sure to do your research and not send mass emails. And this is a broad advice because I receive so many founders reaching out where it's not a fit. What I say is go to the VC's website. Most VCs, well, I would hope that most VCs, some do, some don't have their criteria on their website. We have like a how we invest page. So what I would say is before reaching out to us or any other VC, first check, do your research to see if that is there or find publicly available information. Specifically, like what we look for is we look for founders that are based in the US, so immigrants to the US, founders that, meaning that the founder was born outside of the US and then moved here. They are a Delaware C Corp. They're selling to the US, so the US is their main market. And the founder is full time, and at least one of their team member is full time as well. And we also expect the co-founders to be full time. That's really important to us. And on full time, so it means that you have to be fully focused on the business, no other like side roles. Oftentimes founders will say, well, I'm full time, but I'm doing this like side thing. It should be fully full time. And then we don't do biotech, cryptocurrency, CPG, or medical devices. And we typically write like 100 to 100K checks. And I would say for us, like what really excites us about founders, like why would we pick you, right? Like, so if you're looking to pitch us, like we love founders that know how to sell. Can you sell to customers? Can you sell to investors? Really strong why now? Like, why are you building in this market? And then is there like a strong founder market fit? So founder market fit meaning, domain expertise. Is there a passion? Is there some core reason for why you're building? Because we think like that really helps set you apart. And it's also similar to like my own personal why, like why I chose VC, like my own passion for working with underrepresented founders. So I love to see that passion in founders. Like when I'm taking a call with the founder, I really want to just have that, like, or maybe from reading their deck or their initial outreach message, like I want to just be so excited that I want to tell our team and say, hey, like need to invest now. So that's what would be, I'd say, just make me super excited. And we do respond to cold outreach. So I think that's also really important too.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Have a disciplined approach. I mean, that's kind of the theme across a lot of the discussions that I had about AI. And I agree with it in pretty much every aspect of life. You got to be a little bit more disciplined. Just don't expect to have the easy button and it goes from there. And yeah, hone your skills and be focused. I think that's a great philosophy and great advice for any potential founders for you. So excellent, Sarah. Well, I really appreciate the time. I'm sure our viewers will too. And we'll keep up with you, see the success there of Wokello, and maybe do another follow up on this discussion here in a couple of months to see what 2026 has brought you guys. So, again, I thank you very much for your time and looking forward to the next discussion.
Of course. Of course. Thank you so much.
Great.